And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 276. Today we're talking about the making of an album cover, or at least the photography for an album cover for Firelight Trio and their new album Midnight Followed. So I'm going to be talking you through the creating of that photo. If you happen to be watching live, leave a comment and we can make a start. So welcome to, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 276. Today is the Firelight Trio, their new album, Midnight Followed, and the photography I did for the album cover. Now, I've done a couple of album covers before now. Most of the time, they tend to have been photos I've taken that then have been decided to be used as an album cover. However, in this case, we took the photo specifically to create an album cover. So I'm going to be talking to you about the thought process that went through and maybe even asking you what you might have done in that situation. Because as in any kind of commissioned photo shoot, you run into unexpected problems and you then have to kind of deal with what's in front of you rather than necessarily what you thought was going to be in front of you. Meanwhile, we are here live on YouTube, well, live unless you're watching the recording, in which case leave a comment. If you're watching live, leave a comment in the chat box. If you're not watching live, then you can still leave a comment down below. It's just I won't be able to respond to you in real time, but your thoughts and input are always valued. Also, click the like, click the subscribe, in fact, actually, it's useful if you are watching live, if you can click the like, because I think the more likes that go on, the more likely it is that YouTube will slot it into somebody else's feed and say, hey, there's a photography podcast going on live right now. And you never know, we might get somebody else to join us. Meanwhile, I see we've got a couple of comments in already, so let's see what we have here. Lisa says, good morning from an extremely cold Maryland. April says, greetings from a brutally cold, mostly sunny Long Island, New York. John Harvey says, good day everyone from a still extremely cold here in Ohio. Janet says hi from a snowy, icy Niagara Falls, where it's now warmed up to 9 degrees Celsius after shooting sunrise in -15. Lisa says below 0 Fahrenheit this morning. That's cold. Where are we? Susan says hi from a rather dreich day in Kirkcudbright. Not cold, not too cold though. Now here in southwest Scotland, Kirkcudbright's just 9 miles down the road from here in Castle Douglas. It's dull, damp, overcast, wet, miserable, but not the brutally cold that you have over in America at the moment. Just that kind of damp, cold, probably about 5-6 degrees Celsius, something like that. VG joins us, says from Chennai, still a few weeks of cold weather. Last few weeks of cold weather. It's cold, as I think we established once before, is slightly not into the -degrees Celsius for VG, but still cold for VG. Will still be summer here in Scotland, possibly 19 or 20 degrees Celsius. But if you're not used to that, then it will feel cold. So cold is cold, regardless of, Yes, Janet says, what's your definition of cold, VG? Stacey says, good morning from a very cold. The snow is still on the ground, but it's sunny, but not melting. Marilyn joins us and says, hello from a thawing Colorado. Okay, must be slightly warmer than in Colorado. Excellent. Okay, right. So we have people, we have a topic, we have a podcast. So what we're going to be talking about, and just tidy up my little desktop area here. And, no, didn't want to do that. I want to do that. Yes, so what we're talking about today then is the creating of an album. Oh, hang on a sec. Sandra's joined us. Says, good afternoon from a damp and mild Birmingham. That's Birmingham in the UK, not Birmingham, USA. So yes, today then we're talking about the creation of doing a set of photos, specifically with the idea of creating an album cover. And this is for the Firelight Trio. Now, some of you may remember, if we go back a few months, it was in episode 259, I think. I was talking then about doing some embedded photography with Firelight Trio. Just one sec. Oh, we have Page of Styles has joined us. There's a heat wave in Buffalo, New York, 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Welcome, Paige. Yeah, heat wave indeed. Yes. So where was I? Yes. Sorry. Welcome, Paige. Yes. Slightly thrown off track. That's okay. So yes, if we go back to, so let's talk a little bit. First of all, what I'll do is I'll little bit of background for those of you who didn't watch previous episodes or haven't watched it. There's a band, it's local band. They are all international level musicians and they played in various places around the world. But they're called Firelight Trio. So it's 3 musicians and they are world-class musicians. And previously, few years, 2-3 years ago, I did a shoot for them in amongst another set of shots that I was doing for another project. But essentially what we did was we did a kind of white room type shoot. So let me just tell you what, let me flick that over there just to show you then. So this is the Firelight Trio. And what we have is we have Ruth on the left, who is playing a nickel harper. And a nickel harper is a Scandinavian instrument. It's about the size of a viola. But whilst it's a bowed instrument, you can see she's got the bow there. And there are 4 main strings. If you look down at the bridge here, those are the 4 bow strings. There are a whole bunch of strings underneath, which are known as sympathetic strings. So what happens is when you bow one of the main strings, these ones underneath vibrate and it gives this incredibly rich sound. On top of that, rather than pressing down with your fingers, it's got a whole bunch of keys. So she presses the keys then press up against the edge of the string, thereby giving you your little kind of note placements. So it's an incredible set, and if you're ever close up to one of these, it sort of almost vibrates in your chest as you're kind of sitting close to it. It's an amazing thing. We've got Phil in the middle, and Phil, an incredible accordion player, and then we've got Gav over on the right, an amazing fiddle player, and with the Firelight Trio, he actually plays a 5-string fiddle. And then the kind of music they play is it's folk, but it's a mix and very heavily influenced by, you've got Celtic folk on the one side, but then you've also got European folk and Eastern European folk music as well. And then their astonishing musicianship, while you're listening to it, key changes leap about all over the place, timing changes leap about all over the place as well. You're not getting a 3/4 or a 6/8 all the way through from beginning to end, very rarely at any rate. So it becomes really quite an amazing experience. Ruth and Gav on the outside, I've known for, probably about 15, 18 years, something like that. I met them, first of all, in local pub sessions where you turn up once a month, there'll be a local pub and you just sit around, musicians gather and then play and just join in. A lot of fun. And sometimes you're sort of sitting there and I play a bouzouki, I play it. I'm not a musician as such, out there making money doing it or anything like that. I can play well enough to not disturb the flow of the session. I can keep in time and I can keep the key, and that's close enough. So I'll strum or pluck a little bit. But when you're sitting in a circle of people and you've got musicians of this quality, you just have you have the best seats in the house. You're sitting there playing, but you're also listening. And then when you're next to something like the nickel harper, like I say, you can actually feel it vibrating in your chest, and it's quite an amazing experience. A couple more comments. Just Paige says, good morning, looking up OCF photography and was led here. A couple of people saying hi to Paige. Robert joins us from a frozen middle Tennessee, -7 degrees C, and driving home to Texas. Will be listening in. And a couple of people saying welcome to Paige and safe travels to Robert. Okay, excellent. Right, so what we were doing with this shot, with this particular shoot, was essentially the kind of white cube type shoot, where essentially what we're doing is we're deliberately shooting it against a white wall space so that you can essentially expand out in any direction, however much you want. It's a very useful press type shot. So if, for example, what I'll do here is if I open this in Photoshop and just show you what I mean. So I just change that workspace to there so you can kind of see what's going on. So what I can do is if I place the background as white, then if you want to say coming up Firelight Trio and expand it out, you can. You can then have the writing over on the left, or you can have your writing over on the right, or you can have your writing above. And so it becomes a very, very easy kind of setup. You just suit this completely white background. So when you're sort of shooting for musicians, sometimes this kind of setup is one of those very, very useful. You're not looking for anything seriously narrative or seriously dramatic. What you're looking for in this case is we have the three musicians. They're all looking friendly. They're close together. You can see their instruments. Does what it says on the tin. Okay. So, and then from that, you, as well as doing the group shot, you then do individual shots. So Gavin on his own, Ruth on her own, Phil on their own, and then that way they can be moved about depending on the kind of article, where the whole idea with this is to give maximum flexibility for wherever the photo is going to be placed. So if it's going into music magazines, or it's going online, or it's, you know, or it's being made into posters or banners or anything like that, then there's maximum flexibility for crops and for arrangement. So again, doing them all individually, you could cut them out and place them in different places. So if you wanted them further apart, if you wanted them closer together, rather than necessarily having to have the arrangement that I've made here, you could have them all separately too. While I was there, I did just a quick shot of where they sat on the floor. Now the floor was this sort of wooden kind of floor thing here, and it was all a little bit dull, so I added a bit of texture, just added a bit of texture to the floor, texture to the background, and that was just a little extra. In the end, they kind of really liked this one, and this photo ended up getting used quite a lot. So this is where you kind of start off with then, is these kind of photos. And so one way or another, I've been doing little bits of photography on and off with Gavin and Ruth, and now Gavin, Ruth and Phil, for several years. We got somebody else. Sandra's joined us and says, I like the sitting down shot, my favourite. April says she also likes the sitting down shot. Yes, and that's the thing, is that the sitting down shot was actually an afterthought. And as sometimes happens, ends up being the one that everybody likes and ended up getting used more frequently. It doesn't negate the usefulness of the white background ones, but it did add in an extra. Oh, Meg's joined us and says, hello everyone. Hi, Meg. So this is the Firelight Trio. And for those who remember, back during the summer, I did a whole bunch of shots for them. And in essence, we knew the album was going to be coming up. But what we decided to do was some behind the scenes photography. And also, I've talked before, for the more regulars might remember, about this notion of embedded photography. And embedded photography is more than just documentary. It's not just sort of showing up and taking a couple of photos. It's where you become a part of the space, where they are so comfortable with me that I can move around, take the photos, and that I'm not interfering with their rehearsals, with their playing, with their space. They're used to me, they're comfortable with me. I'm part of the scenery, and that kind of gives me an access, an ability to take photos in a close-up way, in a more intimate way, in a more kind of, you feel like you are there with them in the room kind of way than you would normally in a kind of documentary style. And to show you, so I did, across the summer, I did a set of photos. I'm not going to show you all the photos because if you go back to episode 259, I think it is, I talk about it at length there. But you have the likes of this one, where I'm literally over the shoulder of Phil while they're making notes, pausing in the playing. And you can see that normally if somebody was sort of as a photographer, you just turned up into a bunch of strangers and they said, they'd be kind of feeling a bit self-conscious about having you over the shoulder. At this point, Phil's not even aware I'm there. They're completely comfortable with me. Then on a separate occasion, we did a shoot out at the Cat Strand, which is a small local theatre where they were doing like a first performance to start ironing out wrinkles, find out how this thing all sounds live. But I knew that I wasn't going to be able to shoot live, so this was taken during the sound check. So that gave me opportunities to kind of move around in a way without disturbing the audience watching. So we did this during the sound check before the audience turned up. And then I did another shoot with them in the recording studio. So as they were recording this album, this was, so I did a whole bunch of photos here. And this particular one, you can see we're actually kind of in the mixing room. There's a screen up here into the actual recording studio bit so that everybody can see what's going on here. They're listening back to things and the sort of sense of narrative and story going on. So that's where we're kind of at. But there was always this idea that we were going to do an album cover for them as well. So the Firelight Trio album cover. So here we come to this point of what kind of photo do we want? Now they're called the Firelight Trio. So obviously then there's a kind of a sense, we should take a photo of them around a fire. And so they're kind of a bit lit by the fire. So the question I want to ask you, you can very quickly type your notes back. How would you approach this? Now, some of you may have already seen that the album cover has been doing the social media rounds in the last week or so, because the album was launched at the Celtic Connections gig back on the 26th of January. So the photo's been out there. Some of you will have already seen it, but rather than I'm not just thinking about, don't just repeat and tell me what you know that I did. How would you think about going around a firelight shoot? And if you've got any thoughts, just drop them straight into the comments here. It's not, the point is what I'm trying to do here is to try and get you to start to think. Imagine you were commissioned for a moment to photograph a band. Now, some of you have had photos published in books or in calendars, or you've worked with poets, or you've worked with local organisations. I know this. And most of the time, this tends to be you happen to have taken a photo and somebody else has liked that photo and asked if they can include it. But it's quite a different thing when you are actually commissioned to take a photo. So what you're doing now is you're sitting down with the clients, the people that you're going to be doing the photograph for, and you start discussing with them how you might go about it. So I suppose the first thing is, do you shoot indoors or do you shoot outdoors? Or do you shoot in a kind of in-between under some kind of sheltered space? That's maybe slightly more, barn-like, I suppose. Slightly more outdoors than indoors, but not. And there is a thing. So, when you look at like the indoors, what have you, just to the right of Phil here was a fireplace. So you could do it as a kind of an indoor shoot. April says outdoors for the fire. So April's thinking an outdoor shoot is probably the way she would go. But you could do it. You could try an indoor shoot, but you then end up with a couple of problems because, actually my very first thought was, have them all sitting around a fireplace. And if we take this shot here, which is, sorry, I hadn't realised I wasn't actually showing you the previous photo. It doesn't really matter. I think you got the general gist of it. Sandra says, does the music on the album have a theme? Could that impact the cover? Yes, it could. This is true. So if you take a photo like this, so this one was, now actually Susie is a singer as well, but for this photo, this was a photo I did in the role of an author. And we did her in front of a fireplace. And what we've got here is a sense of, you can see the warmth of the fire behind her. We've got like a cool blue, almost like moonlight coming through the window, a sort of warmer glow over on the left. And that's all very well. That gives you a kind of a nice indoor cozy feel, except how would that translate to 3 musicians? Because if you're wanting 3 musicians and around the fireplace, the problem is that essentially, if you try and include the fire, you would have the backs of the musicians. And what we're wanting is the front. You want to be able to see the face. You want to be able to see them playing. So this kind of idea of actually very quickly, you start to realize that an indoor round the fireplace becomes particularly difficult, because if you then sort of have them, if you want to have them lit by the fire, but you want to have the photo of their faces, you've got to essentially be taking the photo at the point the fire is. So you would have the fire behind you and you wouldn't actually have the fire in the shot. So this idea then of having them sitting around the fire, we've kind of excluded ourselves from being able to do it inside. Now, the next idea then was the idea, well, okay, let's go outdoors. And my immediate reaction for this, and this was the first thought that I think all of us had, was the idea of it kind of being a bit round a fire pit out in a field somewhere. And this was reflected by the idea, and it's not uncommon, but when Ruth and Gav got married 2 or 3 years ago, and I was there enjoying and clicking a few snaps while I was there. And because they're musicians, they have a lot of musician friends, there's a lot of music going on. And you have the likes of this, where this very common kind of thing at gatherings, especially they sometimes have these summer gatherings, field just down from their house. And so you have a fire pit, and you have, whether it's benches or sometimes logs, seats that people sit on, they pull out their instruments, and you have these session musicians. So here you can see, this kind of thing. Now, the great thing about this from a photographer's point of view is you can have the fire in the foreground. And so this means I can stand the other side of the fire, unlike indoors where I would actually be sitting in front of the fireplace, because if the fire's in the wall, then you can't be the other side of it. If you're outdoors, then you can have yourself, then the fire, then the musicians, and actually place them all together. So that then was our next idea. But the problem is actually for something like this is a daytime shoot. VG's, talking about the centre, my definition of cold is 18 degrees Celsius. That's plus 18 degrees Celsius. Yes, because for VG, generally speaking, it tends to be closer to 30 degrees Celsius as the norm, I think. So yeah, back to here. So but the problem is with a daytime shoot is, as you can see, because it's sunlight, you're not really seeing a lot of the flame. There's a little bit of flame, there's a little bit of smoke, but if you're talking about a Firelight Trio and you're trying to get a little bit more dramatic, then a daytime shoot maybe isn't going to be the way to go. Perhaps you want an evening shoot. Maybe you could get a blue hour. Maybe you could get something of the hills in the background. And this was the way we started to think. So our initial idea was an outdoor in the field shoot. Yes, so Sandra says 18 degrees is a pleasant day in England. Yes, and it's positively summer here in Scotland. So this was kind of our first idea. But then came the problem of the fact that we had to... There was a very limited time slots, because whilst Gavin and Ruth live just 10, 12 miles down the road from me, Phil, the accordion player, lives up in Edinburgh, which is over 100 miles away and a good couple of hours drive. And so not quite. So we had to find timings when he could come down and I was available and they were available and we could do the shoot. And everybody was really busy over on into autumn and on the run up to when we wanted to get this shoot done, because we also had to get this shoot done with enough run-in time to try and get the album printed in time for Celtic Connections. Ideally, the first aim was to try and get it out before Christmas, but they realised that wasn't going to happen. But they did want to definitely get it launched at the Celtic Connections. So the problem was that on the one day that we knew we were going to be able to get together, it was also forecast for horrific rain. So I went out there the week before to try and check out a couple of places. We went and looked at the field, or what if the weather's okay, maybe we could use this. There's a little space over here. There was the idea that it looked like the rain was forecast a week ahead. Here in Scotland, it's very iffy. You cannot guarantee. The weather could be absolutely, doesn't, if it's forecasting sun or it's forecasting rain, it could be anything a week ahead. But we have to plan for rain in Scotland. And so this idea of a nice, clear evening, blue sky, or blue hour, darkening skies, silhouettes of hills in the background, we couldn't be sure that that was going to happen. So one of the things we did look at a stable. The horse would have to be cleared out. Some of the straw would have to be taken out. But that wasn't looking so great. And then as where do we go? We're walking back and suddenly there was this little copse of woodland. There's just this sort of strip of wood. So here you can see like it's a length, it's not actually very wide. You can see here there's a kind of hedge bit on the right here, and you can see opening out onto the field on the left here. So, I mean, what's that? Probably about 15, 20 feet wide. It's not, maybe 25. It's not that, but it's a very, very thick, dense piece of woodland, to the point whereby if you look up, I mean, this is a quick photo taken on my phone, so we've not really got the detail. Oh, sorry, can't see the image. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, here's the image. Oh, now you still can't see the image. Okay, to go back then. Right. So, had you seen the musicians? Hopefully you're seeing the musicians when I talked about that. But back to here then. Yes, so walking back then, we found this little bit of woodland. And here's the bit that I'm trying to explain, whereby we've got about 25, maybe 30 feet, but probably not as much as 30 feet wide, and this length of trees. But the point is that they were incredibly thatched at the top. All the branches were so overloaded that actually, by and large, this tends to stay fairly dry, even in pretty wet weather. It's almost like having a thatched roof above. So we decided that this would probably be a good place to do the shoot. And sure enough, on the actual day itself that we had to get together, it was torrential. All through the day, it was heavy, heavy, heavy rain. However, by about 5 o'clock in the evening, or 4:30, the rain kind of stopped. By 5 o'clock, it had stopped, and I went out there, we had a meal, we waited for Phil to come down, but it was already starting to get dark by the time we decided we wanted to actually do the shoot. So I'm just sort of seeing here the notion that you can't see the image. I'm assuming by now you would have seen the image that I put up. So what we did, so here's a quick photo then. What we've done is we've decided we're going to do the shoot under here. It stopped raining, there's a couple of drips coming down, but by and large it has stayed more or less dry underneath. We've got one of these fire bowls, wood into it burning. We can see we've got seats sitting around, and we're going to sit them on the other side of the fire. So this is a quick phone photo, and this is the idea. And I look at this and I think, okay, we're definitely onto something here. So I set up lights. Or before I set up lights, first of all, I thought, well, okay, what is it? This is the phone photo. Now, there is a point here, which is your phone, for the most part, will tends to do, when it takes a photo, it's got all sorts of algorithms and computer AI jiggery pokery, and essentially it takes several photos. It does the bracketing bit. It takes photos exposed at different levels, blends them together, and then creates a photo whereby you're getting some of the detail in the shadow, and you're getting some of the detail in the light as well. Sorry, Susan says can't see the phone photo. Everybody's saying photo. Okay, so let's flick. Did I not flick back to this? I am sorry. Yes, too many buttons, not enough attention. Right. Okay. So this photo then I took with the phone. And this just to kind of give me an idea. And I thought, well, okay, that's fine. The problem is that the phone itself is not going to, it's not going to have the quality. So it at screen level, and if you're looking at this on a phone, your own phone, maybe a tablet, you can kind of get away with it. It's quite nice. However, if you start zooming in, you can see, especially over the shadows here, the detail isn't there. You would never be able to use this for an album cover. You know, it's fine as a social media photo, but there isn't the quality to have as, you know, for what we're hoping to do is an album cover, and then maybe out of that creating, you know, or posters or anything like that. So what we have to do is I've then got to use the big camera. So I take a look. So this is the same spot, but now I'm using the big camera. And you can see immediately it's not doing the whole glow thing that the phone is. And in order to try and get even this level of light, what I've done here is I've put up the camera settings that I've got. So what you can see is f4, shutter speed 1/10 of a second at an ISO of 8000. It's taken an ISO 8000 tenth of a second, f4, to be able to get it bright enough, but it's, you know, So this is me trying to capture then the flames. So then what I do is I go, well, okay, this I'm not going to be able to work at this. Again, 8000 ISO, 10th of a second, you're never going to be able to capture what you want. What I really need is I need something like an f8, because, or, you know, a higher f number, because I'm going to want the bowl in front of them to be in focus. I'm wanting them behind them to be in focus. 100th of a second, so I'm not going to worry about, you know, so I can actually, so that the flame itself isn't too blurred. It was part of the idea. ISO 250, give me a clean image. I put up the flashes, strobes, off-camera flashes, click, fire. And what happens is, even though there are flames coming up, you can't see the flames. The flash is blowing out the flames. It's too far. And it's a really strange thing, because I'm standing there and I can see all these flames coming up, and I'm looking in the back camera thinking, I can't see the flames. But let's see what happens. Maybe I've got too many. I've got three light kind of setup, or two, I can't remember exactly now. Was it two or was it three? Anyway, maybe I've got too many lights. So I take out everything except a tall backlight. So over in the back here, I've got on a high stand, I've got a light up here, which I've set up deliberately as a backlight to act as like a kind of moonlight sense. I think that's Ruth just sitting there. And you can find it's creating this little edge light, which I want. We can now see some of the flame, but of course we can't see Ruth. So now I put on another light. You can see, forgive Ruth's expression, this was just a test shot. I've shoved a flash down here to try and light her up. It's creating shadow on the bottom of the fire tray. So it's not going to work as the light to light her up. Go back to this one for a moment. The thing is what we're wanting the musicians to be lit by the fire. What this photo shows me is that the fire, even though I've managed to now get flames, you can see flames, the firelight itself is not enough to light up the musicians. If we have musicians there, and I've just got this one light over here, which is sort of emulating moonlight, then it's not going to be enough. So I'm going to need more light. So I shove in another light over here. That's obviously not going to work where it is. So eventually, after a lot of playing around, we get to this stage here, where what I've done is I've got, as well as that backlight, I've got another light over on the right, which you can see is bouncing off the tree, coming towards them. So that's too strong. But what I've also done is I've placed another light just the other side of the fire tray. Okay, so tucked just behind here is an off-camera flash lying on the ground facing up, and then it's that light which is lighting them up, and that then is supposed to sort of be emulating the firelight as though they are lit by the fire itself. The problem we've got here is that this is too strong here. This isn't quite right. So what I ended up doing was I ended up putting a little yellow gel onto it as well. Swap it. I switched off this light over here. Then this is kind of looking okay-ish, but not quite. We can now see a bit of smoke being lit up. It now looks like there's a light underneath them. Now what I've done, by the time I've got to this point, I've now got... I put the orange gel on it. I've softened down the light on the right. You can just about see... Oh, sorry. You can just about see over on the right here. I don't know whether you can see that. Well, it's a bit of a light over here, which is just catching something. So I've got that much softer to try and light them up a little bit, fill in the shadows a little bit. I've got this light down underneath, but the problem is again, the light is blowing out the actual flames itself. So this is trying to get that balance of natural flames with actually getting them lit up enough is extraordinarily difficult. And after a lot of playing around, so what I first did here was I went back and I used my phone, and this then is just a phone pic. And this is what it kind of looked like without any of the flashes going off. And you go, hey, that looks great. The problem is that the quality isn't there. So to go back to, you can see that it get fine for a phone photo, no good for an album photo. Eventually, though, I realised, okay, let's try, what else can I do? So we go down to an aperture of f/6.3. I take the shutter speed down to a 30th of a second, and I take the ISO to 400. Now, I don't want to go much more than 400. I know 400 is going to be smooth enough. It's not going to be so noisy I've got to worry about it too much. 30th of a second is allowing... the shutter speed can still kind of come in, but it's allowing me I'm coming down on the aperture a bit. And this is, we're getting closer. We're getting more flame and we're getting more light on them. Sandra says, really is complicated. How long did it take you to get the setup you wanted? Longer than I meant it to do. I don't know. There's a lot of playing around and shooting, and I cannot remember the exact amount of time, but you set up the lights. By the time you go click the first time and to the time that you've actually worked it out, could be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I can't remember exactly how long it took, but there was a lot of run around, move this light, try that one, panic, try and show that I'm not, try not to show that I'm panicking, and moving on. And then eventually we get to this, and this is where I'm at my happiest. So we get an aperture of 5.6, shutter speed of 1/25th of a second, and that allows me to not go below above an ISO of 400. And with then, so the light setup, we've got the 3 lights in the background over here behind this tree on a high stand. I've got a light coming down. I might even have a slight blue gel on it. I can't remember, or whether I left it. I think I might, maybe I left that one white. Tucked to the other side of the fire tray, I've got a flash with a yellow gel on it, and then that's lighting up their faces from below. And just over to the right, I've got another flash on a very low power setting, just to kind of fill in some of the shadows. This then ends up being the photo we like. This is the photo we want. And once I've then taken this photo, I've then spent my however many hours in Photoshop going around pixel pushing, lightening this bit, darkening that bit, getting rid of this little bit of hose, softening little bits of shadow, all the rest of it. We end up with this photo. So this then is the final edited version of this. Okay, so the ISO 400 has allowed me enough to be able to bring details out of the shadows without it absolutely killing it with too much noise. And part of that is because of the camera that I've got. How well your camera handles different ISO levels varies from camera to camera. This then becomes the photo. This is the photo where everybody's happy with it. April says, I like how it came out. I think I would try taking the photo by a lake with a fire pit, hoping for some natural light from the moon to help me, although that may not be possible. And this is true. It's all one of the things you tend to find is the natural light is never bright enough. You'll know this with your own cameras, that, you know, you try and take a photo by moonlight, you try and take a photo by firelight, and what happens is the camera is never as sophisticated as your eye. You end up at ISO 1200 or 12,000 plus, and it's noisy, it's grainy, there's not enough light. So the way that if you're doing something whereby you are really needing the quality, so you need to be at sort of ISO 400 or less, you know that because the quality is this, okay, fine, it's going to sit on an album that's maybe only 5 inches wide, CD cover, but it could also be blown up to a poster. It could also end up as a double page spread in a music magazine. So the quality has to be there. So in the end, what we do is we pretend light it. I mean, the set is real. We've not built this set. This is in a woodland, but the moon wasn't out and we were under very thickly thatched dark trees. So I've set up a light to look like the moon. I've set up another light to light them up that looks, so it looks like they're lit by the fire. And then I've got another light just to fill in the shadows. So I'm using, using it the way that I have, the fire in the fire pit is real, which is very useful. I've not had to Photoshop that bit of fire in afterwards, because Photoshopping in fire is an absolute nightmare because it's semi-transparent and all the rest of it. Now, of all the different photos we took, this was the one that by far stood out the best, because what we were trying to do was to get that sense of them just looking into the fire, that sense of you're in this other world, that, you know, the Firelight Trio, you step into this world and they're lost in the music, they're lost in their thoughts. It's a really powerful, evocative image. And it's not entirely posed either. I mean, of course it's posed, we did the setup and everything else, but while I was doing the photos, they found it easier to actually play. They are in fact playing. Now, they're not going full pelt at it, they're just softly playing. And when you allow musicians to just softly play, they start to move into that playing music zone. We've decided that they're allowed to sort of sit and stare into the fire, so they sit and stare into the fire while they're playing. And so actually what happens is after a while, after a few minutes, these expressions become real. They're not forced. They are actually looking into the fire, becoming contemplative while they're playing. And because they're comfortable with me, because, you know, we've already been shooting all year and Ruth and Gav have been shooting for years. So, you know, we're past that sort of intense self-consciousness that you run up against. Okay, comments here. Marilyn says beautiful. Lisa says some motivated light is necessary. Sandra says lovely photo. John says this is a shot I would have imagined for the assignment, but I doubt I could have figured it all out. Sounds like you needed a lot of lights and equipment. April says I like the feel of this shot, would love to hear them play. And Lisa says such a beautiful shot. Well, actually, if you look up Firelight Trio, go to Bandcamp, I think they've got them, but you know, you could also firelighttrio.co.uk or firelighttrio.com. If I haven't done it already, if you look in the description part of this video, I will have a link to their site, so you can go to their site and from there you can go off and find out more about their music. Yes, in terms of the light, in the end it's a 3-light setup, John. I've got off-camera flashes, and if you've never used off-camera flashes, then yes, that's complicated. If you have, it's not that complicated. Basically, you have a trigger that goes on top of the camera, and then you have other equivalent triggers on the flashes wherever, so that when I go click, it triggers the flashes. So then it's a case of where do I put them? And you put them according to what kind of lighting effect you're wanting. And the effect that we wanted was for them to look like they were lit by the fire, and a sense of being lit slightly by the moon in the wood as well. And then a little bit of fill light just to take things out of the shadows. And I understood this before I started. I kind of knew what I needed to do. But once you're in there, it's one thing to understand the principle, but it's another thing when you go click and it's not looking right in the camera and you have to keep making the adjustments. But that comes through experience. The more you do this, the quicker you find the solution. We've talked many times before about the idea that photography is 125th of a second going click, or in this case, the 30th of a 25th of a second going click. But the rest of the time is problem solving. The rest of the time is trying to work out how to get the effect you want when you look in the back of the camera and you go, that's not looking good. That's not looking good enough. Now, if we go back to this photo, once we got this photo, I knew this was good enough. I knew from this, I would be able to create something like this. Now you can see that obviously there's more detail taken out of the shadows. There's more color. It's richer and everything else. John says he has used off-camera flashes. Yeah, excellent. You'll know how. So it's a case, but it's all about the narrative. It's all about the story. Actually, one little extra for anybody who's interested. One of the problems I did find was this fire pit, portable fire pit, it's metal, so it gets very, very, very hot. Now I had my off-camera flash just the other side of it, tucked down, just underneath the bowl, pointing up. The problem was it got extraordinarily hot, so very quickly I realised if I wasn't careful it was going to start melting my flash. So what I actually had to do was I had to get a chunk of wood and stick a chunk of wood just up against the bowl and then place my flash tucked under it. So I actually had to use this piece of wood as a barrier to the heat of the fire to stop the flash from melting. Yeah, problem solving all the time. Susan says, beautifully lit, well worth the faffing. Thank you. John says your end result turned out really well. Thank you. Now, this then is the photo that's been turned into the album cover. Now, interestingly for me, when we were talking about doing the photo, I was going to give it more height because I was thinking about the idea of doing a square CD cover. You're wanting a square image, but they said no. Actually, what's going to happen? We want to have it in a landscape format because we're going to have the logo and the name underneath. So it'd be Firelight Trio, picture, midnight followed underneath. And so it didn't matter that it wasn't square. However, as I discovered last week when the album actually came out, it is a square picture. This is so much fun. You see, I get so used to seeing my photos on the screen that that when you see them actually printed out, it's really quite cool. But yeah, the full opens up. In fact, very, very faintly, I don't suppose you'll really be able to see this, but actually very faintly in the background here is one of the pictures from the recording studio, as is here behind the writing. They've used some of the photos from the other side, just behind the writing, which is kind of cool. If we go on to here, so here you can then see this is now what the more observant of you might notice is there's an above here and a blue light that looks like the moon. That wasn't in this one. And so for all the fact that I went ahead and I created this, the graphic designer who was actually making the album cover decided that they did want to fill it. They didn't just want to have a strip along the middle with the logo above and the title below. They wanted to have a complete thing. And as such, a bit was missing. So what they've done is, I think they've used generative fill. I can't be sure. I haven't met the person. I haven't talked to them. But for me, and this is where you really get into the detail-driven bit of the photographer. If I look here, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this down. Notice how this branch, take this branch, it's sharp up to this point. There's a little line here, and above that it gets blurrier. And I can see essentially the blurred fill. And one of the things I know about generative fill in Photoshop, when we've talked about it, is that it doesn't tend to, it's not as high resolution as a normal picture. So actually, by using generative fill, the quality isn't quite there. However, having said that, when I look at it on this, I can't see it because this is only 5 inches wide and you don't zoom in on the same way. So you get away with it on this. Nobody's ever going to know. I know, you now know, but that's because you follow the podcast and I'm giving away the secrets. But the thing is though he's included the light there, it's still completely in keeping, and it gives that feeling of the moonlight, and it still lines up. You can still see the backlight that I set about creating. You can see it on Ruth's hair and hat cap here, the edge of the cap, the edge of the shoulder, and what have you. The whole point of having that light there was to make it feel like it was lit by the moon, and so the fact that the graphic designers included that is fine, okay, and is in keeping with the album. It's another interesting point as well, which is to a degree when you create a photo, and I've gone to all that effort of creating the photo, but now somebody else is going to take that photo and convert it to a slightly different use. They are going, in this case, they're making a photo album, as well as making it squarer. One of the things you'll notice is there is a colour tint to it. There's this sort of slight, getting bluish. I think on my computer screen it comes out slightly more purple. But, and so they've given it a colour grading that I didn't give. But then that's in keeping with, so I'm supplying a photo, but then the graphic designer is still then taking their interpretation in order to create an album cover. And it's a little bit, I suppose, like you get somebody who writes a book and then it's made into a TV series or a film, and the TV series or film isn't exactly like the book because it's a slightly different medium. It's being played in a different way to a different audience in a different way. And likewise, I can create a photo that maybe I would stick in a frame, but it's not functioning in the same way as the album cover. The album cover also then has to have the logo on it, has to have the title on it, is in a particular format. As such, he had I think it was a he, I could be wrong here, maybe I'm just anyway, they, the graphic designer who created the album cover then had other agendas to work with, and they take my photo, even though the album cover is ostensibly my photo, but they have to make adjustments to it, maybe in a way that I wouldn't have, but then I'm not the graphic designer, and that's okay. They're making decisions. And this is the point that I want to make, is that actually I may have created the photo, but I've then got to let go of it to an extent. I've got to allow, it's my baby goes out into the world and is now running its own life. And it's a kind of a bit of an odd one, that when you've created something, but now somebody else takes something and does something else with it. But overall, what you then have to do is you then have to look back and you have to go, here's an album cover, got my pick on it. Wow, how cool is that? And I'm delighted with it. I do think it really, really works. What I will do, just as a little extra here, is I'll show you some of the other photos we did from that set as well. April says, love it, you guys work together, great cover. So what I then did was I did a couple of photos where I took the camera off the tripod, and I then did a little bit of handheld, and I wanted to try and get a couple of other variations on this. And variations can either be because sometimes that square format doesn't really work. Sometimes if you are getting something like a magazine article out of it, different layouts will work out slightly better. Or even just slight variations on mood, depending. So if we flip to this one, so what I did with this one is I've now gone for a more cinematic crop. I've gone for the point. So I've lifted the camera off the tripod. I'm now hand holding, and I've gone for this more widescreen feel. And there's a different mood where the last one is very much lost in thought. There's playfulness here. The way Ruth is looking across at Gav. Gav's slightly lost in his own world. But there's a different mood and feel to this one. And this is kind of quite fun. I really like this one. Then I went down low and I shot up. So I'm getting down lower by the fire. And I'm deliberately doing it to get the light that's in the back, the light actually up on the stand that I'm using to emulate the moon. And this one now has the fire in the foreground and the moon in the background. And we're looking up at them. And actually from this angle, It sort of reminds me a little bit of like The Hobbit with the ogres or giants or something. They go sort of fairy stories. I could almost imagine like being a small person, you know, in some fantasy story, walking through the woods, and you come across these absolute giants who are there playing away in their music. Sure, there's a story there to be told. So again, completely different feel to this one. And then, then there was another bit. I nipped off for a pee and I came back and I saw the way the light was floating in the woods. So I thought, well, okay, so I did a quick phone pick to say, well, look, what if you were standing the other side of the fire? Because essentially where they're standing now is where I had photographed them. So we got them to stand on the other side of the fire. This is a quick phone pick. And I thought, what would it be like if we sort of had through the trees? But again, as a phone pick, it's not working. The quality just isn't there. You can see that. You know, if we go into the faces, you can barely make, you know, it fine as a quick phone pick, no good as a... So what I did was I then set up this. So now I've moved that light to create the moonlight effect over here. I've now got the flash, the other side of the bowl, so it's lighting them up. And what you can see here now is that there's much more detail in the face, and that this actually is good enough to be in a magazine, on a poster, if needed, with space maybe down the bottom there to do some writing. So there's the kind of play around with that. So it's a different one. I don't think it's as effective, and I'm not sure whether it will ever get used, but it was just giving options. And then finally, there's this one here, which is quite similar to the other one, slightly different feel, a little bit more kind of laughter, and the moon is included. This one's taken from further back, and this one is designed as the ultimate flexibility photo. So being further back, we can now, if I open this in, we've got to open that with Photoshop, what we have is the ultimate crop. So if you want to crop it square, you can. If you wanted to crop it portrait, you can. If you want to have it cinematic, you can. If you wanted to have this on one side, so there was double page spread where you've got the main picture on one side and writing on that side, you can. Or double page spread the other way, where you have the main picture on one side and the writing on the other side. So this then is designed to be the ultimate inflexibility photo. Now, it doesn't end up having the same, this one wasn't used as the album cover because ultimately the album cover photo is about the expression, is closer in, and these expressions are just, they do it. It really works in a way. Whereas the expressions on here, they're fun, they're playing, but it maybe doesn't have quite the same impact. So this is better than as a usable photo for other things. So if you wanted to create a banner, if you wanted to create a roll-up thing, if you're wanting to, you know, so this then created for that idea. So hopefully then that gives you a sort of sense of the different ways of approaching. So to kind of pull it together as such, when shooting an album cover, there's all sorts of things to go through. It's not just a case of will it fit this size, you know, or will it fit this size with writing, which it might also do. There was a whole notion of we need to get the narrative right. We've talked before so often about the notion, what's the narrative? Firelight Trio, the band, I mean, interesting, was it Sandra said earlier, are there particular, is there a narrative of the album which might dictate? And that's true. You could have that. If this one was called Moonlight on the Beach, then, you know, it would have made maybe sense to actually do this down on the beach. This one, Midnight Followed, a sense of nighttime. Firelight Trio, I think their previous album, suddenly I can't remember what the cover was, but I think it was more a design thing. It wasn't photo led. So this idea of the picture of the three of them all around the fire, and then how do we create that? Like I say, the original idea, well, very, very first idea, maybe in a pub setting or maybe in a home setting indoors. That then realised very, very quickly, almost as soon as the idea comes out my mouth, I realise that's not going to work. Second idea is in the field. Turns out the weather isn't going to work with us. While we're trying to look for alternatives, we come across this little copse of woods and go, oh wow, that could work, because then not only have you got them round the fireplace and you've got the light, but the light is bouncing off the trees, which is adding to the deep sense of atmosphere about it all. So bit by bit, that comes together. So then you go, well, okay, we're going to have the fire in the trees. How do I arrange the light? And one of the first things I always think about is backlight. Where can I get a bit of backlight in? How many times have I said, backlight is the photographer's secret weapon? And at this point, we're thinking backlight, moonlight. So I work out where that light's going to go before I start working out anything else. I've already figured that chances are they probably aren't going to be lit by the firelight. So I've started thinking that maybe the best thing we're going to need to do is stick a flash down in front of the fire so it's going to look like they're lit by the firelight. A trick that I've used several times before, some of you may remember, and other podcasts I've talked about. And then when I do that, I realise a need for a third one, just to fill in a bit of the shadows, because some of the shadows are just too dark. And when I come to lighten it, it's not going to work fully. So it is step-by-step problem solving by problem solving, but get it right and it works. So that's kind of where we were with that. We've got a couple more comments. So Lisa says, this is very valuable info, Kim. Thanks for sharing your thought process with us. Good, I'm glad. I'm never entirely sure. It's less interactive, this kind of podcast. I'm kind of telling you what to do, but by all means, please ask the questions. I do like the more interactive. But yes, if I can give you these kind of insights, this is partly what this podcast is about. And Susan says, I think you should all go and listen to Firelight Trio after this. They're great. Yes, they really are. And firelighttrio.co.uk is where you want to go, and from there you'll find links to other places you can see them, hear them, and what have you. But like I say, I will, if it's not already in the links in the link in the bottom, in the description at the bottom, I will place it in when I put the menu bit up later in the day. Right, okay, so I think that pretty much covers that. What I will do, though, before you run off, is there's a notion of the smug points, and then I'll tell you what's coming up next week. And these things are all related, and in fact, even related to today in some ways, because what happened was the smug points ended up being a rollover. So, because in January, accumulated smug points, April and Marilyn both came in joint leaders at 70 smug points each. Nicola was on 65 and VG on 50. So they both won. And I thought, well, okay, what am I going to do here? How do we pick the topic for February? Now, prior to them winning, I'd also had an email from Sandra asking about the notion of low light photography, or particularly for when you've got things like you're going to festivals, light festivals and things like that. And she's been shooting various light festivals, and she wanted some information about how to shoot in this kind of low light, mixed light situation. So hopefully, Sandra, you might have picked up some of the information. There's bits of information come out from this, but what I've decided to do is I'm going to dedicate February to that. So next week will be all about low light photography, what you need to take into consideration, how to get around some of the problems. We've talked about some of these bits today. I will expand on that and try and give you different ideas. So low light photography next week. Then I will do a feedback session. So chance for you to send in your images, get direct feedback on your photos, and then then we will have a low light challenge. Okay, so when I talk to you all next week about the low light, I will then do a low light challenge for the 2 weeks ahead of that, and that will take us through February. The rollover with smug points means we will carry on, and then when we get to the end of February, whoever's got the most smug points, they get to choose the topic for March. So at the moment, neck and neck between Marilyn and April, with Nicola just 5 points behind, VG just 15 points behind. However, if you start putting in images for feedback and critique, remember you get bonus 25 smug points. Turning up here, remembering to comment, you get your 5 smug points. Enter into the challenge, you get 10 smug points. Then there's various smug points to be get gained from what the reactions are to your photos in, whether it's the crowd vote or my opinion, my vote on your challenge entry as well. So it could go in any direction. Plenty to play for in February. So anyway, that all in all, that kind of brings us towards the end. Thank you ever so much for everybody who's turned up. Like I said, I would definitely recommend going and look out the Firelight Trio. Yeah, so next week then, low light photography. And look forward to seeing you all then. Take care. Bye-bye.